Welcome to the latest podcast. I'm pleased to introduce the first episode of our Topic of the Month series, and we'll be looking in particular at the topic of circular plastics today. I'm pleased to be joined by Elizabeth Staab, Global Packaging Sustainability Manager at HB Fuller. Thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Libby. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, perhaps you could just tell me a little bit about your role at HB Fuller and your focus.
So at HB Fuller, in my role as the Global Packaging Sustainability Manager, I very much look at the role of the adhesives, what impact they have on the packaging product that they go into, whether that is closing a box, laminating flexible packaging, putting a label on a PET bottle, on a glass bottle, e-commerce packaging, all those sorts of packaging types that we use every day, see on the supermarket shelf, receive at home, use, and then throw away, and hopefully then put in the correct recycling bin. So really making sure that our adhesives are designed for recyclability and ready for the circular economy.
Thank you. And I'm going to delve into quite a deep question for my first one. I'd like to ask you, what are the strategic challenges facing the circular economy when it comes to flexible plastic?
Well, for plastics, rigid and flexible plastics, I'd say the most challenging aspect really for the circular economy is that there are really so many players to make it work, and so many players that have to cooperate, work together, have their standards aligned with one another so that the materials can flow through this cycle in an effective way. And that is really the challenge. I think it really starts with, the infrastructure, the collection, the sorting. And we just saw two recyclers in the Netherlands, plastic recyclers, that closed down at the end of last year. And that's then really where this cycle starts breaking down if it's not economically feasible for each of these players in the network. So, as I mentioned, infrastructure is absolutely crucial for plastics. We have two ways really to recycle plastics: mechanical recycling, which I'd say is very well known with PET bottles in particular. Although not all PET is recycled back into beverage bottles, some of it goes into clothing as well. But then for flexible plastics in particular, chemical recycling is also one of the answers for that to be used. And here the infrastructure is still very much at the beginning in Europe. And the other thing is really the standards that are being used. And we'll be talking more about the packaging waste regulation, of course. But that's, again, where you have substances of concern. Plastics are very, very complex. There are many different types. And that's then where reliable testing protocols that are agreed upon by all of the players in the industry are of particular importance.
Yeah, so you're leading into my next question that I had for you there, in particular focusing on PPWR guidelines and deadlines. How do you develop adhesives, etc., to fit into these schemes?
Oh, that's a challenge, of course, because it's a little bit of a moving target, if you will. So the design for recycling guidelines, as outlined in the PPWR, which will be added as delegated and implementing acts, should come by the end of 2027. So we're really working on tight deadlines here. So there are key aspects that we expect in those design for recycling guidelines, depending on the type of material. There's, of course, lots of activity ongoing to set those standards, set the testing protocols, etc. We then have the design for recycling guidelines that get implemented as delegated acts. But how do those get translated into the ABC ratings and then make that packaging permissible, that it can be put into the market in Europe? And that's really where the rubber hits the road, if you will, and where then those design for recycling guidelines take on their true meaning when they get translated into those ABC ratings. So the testing protocols are of utmost importance. But for us as an adhesive developer and manufacturer, it basically translates into continuous development. We've been working on adhesives that are designed for recyclability for many years now, whether that is for labels on beverage containers or also flexible packaging for mechanical recycling. So we already have several products in our product line. Because the substrates also keep on changing with increased recycled content, we cannot wait for the guidelines. We're already well into many years of development and new product launches, and that will continue for the foreseeable future.
And what is the design for recyclability and recycled content requirements demanded by regulation?
The one aspect is really the recycled content that needs to be used for plastic packaging going forward starting 2030. So the recycled content, and here we really need to be very careful what we are talking about because it's different for contact sensitive or direct food contact plastic packaging. So for PET bottles, we have PET bottle to bottle recycling, and that's really the one big exception in the European Union from a food contact regulation point of view, where the mechanically recycled plastic can be used for direct food contact, can be used as a beverage bottle. Again, for other plastic packaging, flexible plastic packaging, we cannot use the mechanically recycled plastic for food contact packaging. We can use chemically recycled plastics, and those are then basically like new because the chemical recycling process, there are many different technologies here and processes, but essentially they break the polymers down to varying degrees and then start over with the polymerization process again. And that essentially gives you a virgin quality plastic and therefore can be used in direct food contact. The other demands of the regulation are that plastic components under 5% do not need to contain recycled content. And also adhesives are not considered a plastic under the ban on single-use plastics. But of course, we're looking for alternative raw materials to use more sustainable alternatives, whether those are renewable raw materials. We have some options for chemically recycled raw materials. So we're definitely exploring that area, but it's not a requirement demanded by the regulation.
Okay, so you've touched a little bit already on some of the challenges, but what challenges do you face when it comes to meeting the various recyclability standards across Europe, and how do you ensure alignment?
Well, the thing is that we really do see differences from one country to the next. If I'm thinking specifically about PET labeling, for example, and then wash off of the label and the adhesive from the PET bottle, because of course, the cleaner the PET goes into that recycling process, the higher quality recycled PET you're going to get out the other end, which of course benefits everyone. So here we see considerable differences in the collection and sortation. It, of course, makes a huge difference if a country has a deposit return scheme. The PPWR also demands that by 2028, all EU countries have deposit return schemes, and that will considerably help that separate collection and also to be able to boost the overall recycling rate of PET. We do have different certifications, whether that's PET Cycle, RetroPack, Veolia, Recyclast, just to name a few, that some cover the entire European Union, some cover certain countries. And then, of course, we have to make sure that our products do live up to those standards and have the multiple certifications. But then, of course, we are relying on the fact that these testing protocols are mirroring as best as possible what actually happens at the recyclers. And there are many studies and lots of discussion ongoing how well that really represents what happens in reality. And that will always be a conflict because of huge industrial installation with many different factors, the input that is coming into those facilities, mirroring that 100% in a laboratory. Never say never, but is extremely challenging. And all of these tests also still need to be affordable. So that's also an aspect one needs to take into consideration.
Thank you. And you've previously touched upon the fact there's been a couple of recent closures lately, but could you give me some insight on the state of the recycling infrastructure and how does this influence your decision making?
Well, I'd say the recycling infrastructure overall across Europe differs greatly. There are some countries that have a very well-developed recycling infrastructure, have also been having a policy of recycling for numerous decades, whereas other countries are perhaps a bit newer to the game. So the two big components are really, on the one hand, collection and sortation, and on the other hand, the recycling plants that then produce the recycled materials. And it's of the utmost importance that those recycling plants then have a market where they can sell that recycled material. And that's, of course, also a big discussion with regards to imports into the European Union. How can those be certified recycled materials, that they have similar quality, etc. So that's a whole another chapter. We could have a whole another separate discussion just on that topic alone. But as you said, the collection rates, they do differ greatly between countries, and the PPWR definitely sets incentives for all countries to improve their recycling structure, their infrastructure, and make investments there. I'd say at the end of the day, it does not necessarily influence our decision making that much because we are mainly focused on the testing protocols and making sure that our adhesives, if that packaging reaches a recycling center, can be recycled as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. How challenging is it to keep one step ahead, meeting approvals and facing the pressure that comes with the testing?
Well, it's a challenge, no doubt, because you're really working a little bit with a moving goalpost. But I'd say at HP Fuller, that's really what we thrive on: is innovation, new product developments, working with our customers to understand their changing needs, working with co-suppliers and industry partners really to stay ahead of that trend and to deliver the high-performing products our customers need. And we are also heavily involved with various industry associations in order to understand really in detail these testing protocols, because some of these testing protocols are also changing and are also developing as state-of-the-art recycling moves forward as well. So again, there are many moving pieces, but I'd really say that at HB Fuller, that's a challenge our scientists enjoy.
And what are some of the technical challenges involved? Maybe you could give me some examples of HB Fuller's innovations and product development.
I'd be happy to. So we've talked about PET again, and I like talking about PET just because here the recycling rates are so high, and we also see our customers already using rather high percentages of recycled PET in their beverage bottles. And here we are facing various changes. So thinner and thinner PET bottles, thinner labels. Now we have monolayer labels, and they have to adhere well to each other. If the bottle comes straight out of the fridge and has condensation on it, you don't want the label to slip. But then, of course, when it goes into the recycling process, that label and adhesive has to come off easily. There are various wash-off protocols. But again, we have moving parts with changes in the PET, changes in the label, and then also looking at the recycling process. So when we're considering flexible packaging, specifically mechanically recycled, the adhesive then forms part of the new film that gets blown, because essentially in mechanical recycling, that flexible packaging is taken, it is cleaned, but then it gets melted down and a new film is blown. And there, to ensure an immaculate film that doesn't have any gels in it, doesn't have any discoloration, etc., that is really where we see great challenges because of the differences and the variation that you can have. There's not just one repeat film, for example. So we are working on planning further product launches in this area for the year. So it's an exciting space. But then, of course, for flexible packaging, also chemical recycling will become more and more important as we move on, again, to then be able to have that food contact material that can then be used for food packaging.
And my next question is a little more detailed. How do you balance the challenges of using recycled content when it comes down to quality, brands and consumer acceptance, for example, when it comes to, for example, reduced clarity? For adhesives, it means adjustments to formulation, such as more demanding to adhere on recycled content. But where are the limits here?
Well, I'd say the limits, I think we continue to push the limits. I mean, I think that's all what innovation and science is all about, is to really be able to push those limits. Overall, I would argue that consumers are very spoiled and thinking of a PET bottle, regardless of the percentage of recycled PET. Consumers are not going to really be very accepting of a foggy water bottle, for example. They want to have a transparent PET water bottle. And so overall, the differences that we see in terms of clarity, transparency of a virgin PET versus a recycled PET, even 100% recycled PET, is really minimal and not visible to the human eye. And I think that is really also thanks to the deposit return schemes, that separate collection, which really guarantees a very high quality input into the recycling process. When we're looking at flexible packaging, the mechanically recycled films cannot be used for direct food contact applications under European food contact law. So for direct food contact, as I said earlier, really only chemically recycled plastics may be used, or virgin, of course. Adhesives themselves, as I mentioned, do not use recycled content by PPWR, but of course that is something that we are exploring, what the possibilities are there.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that regarding the adhesives. My final question for you is, how do we work together across the value chain over the next few years to meet requirements and ensure optimum design and infrastructure as well?
I'd say overall, the industry is really trying hard to work together already. If we look at the various industry associations that are working along the supply chain for a specific material type, whether that's fiber-based or plastics, and these associations, they really span the entire supply chain, starting with raw material suppliers, recyclers, brands, and everybody in between. So that communication is already ongoing. Obviously, it's very complex. Each company has their own interests at heart. But at the end, we need to achieve the circular economy and also make sure that the packaging industry is functioning well under the PPWR. So more work needs to be done. Communication is key, as always. And in understanding that certain compromises need to be made along the way. I think overall, more investment in state-of-the-art recycling facilities, an openness to innovation and new materials, but at the same time, also simplification of material combinations, just to name a few. So I think a lot of work has been done, but more work is definitely required.
Again, thank you. And I feel like I've grilled you with my questions in this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with me and our listeners today. Is there anything you think we haven't covered by my questions that you would like to share with our audience when it comes to circular plastics?
Well, it's my pleasure to be here today. I think circular plastics, it's definitely a space to watch. There's much innovation that is already has already been launched. There's more innovation coming. And I would just really want to say that for us, with the PPWR and the legislation that is coming, yes, we have testing guidelines, and yes, we have these requirements that we need to adhere to. I'm a strong believer in innovation, and I really do believe that with collaboration and innovation, we will be able to crack this and be able to achieve a circular economy when it comes to packaging here in Europe. So, thank you very much for having me today.
No problem. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise again. And thank you to all our listeners that have tuned in to listen to this particular podcast focusing on topic of the month, this time being circular plastics. And we look forward to you joining us for our next topic of the month as well. So keep tuning in.